to the front of the net. Puck work to the outside to Eklund. Howe back to Eklund again. Kerr sparring with Stevens in front. Eklund creeps behind. Out in front to Kerr. He scores! Tim Kerr and the Flyers are perfect on 5-on-3s. They are 3 for 3. Get their first power play goal of the night and tie the game.
Everybody, it's Isaiah, just reminding you that FlyersNittyGritty.com and the O&B Puckcast are brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. Hey, do you have damage to your home? Not sure who to call? We suggest that you call Summit Public Adjusters before your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be very stressful. Let Summit take the stress out of the claims process. From storm damage to your roof, to toilet overflows, to broken pipes and fires, Summit gets you the most money for your repairs. So next time Mother Nature leaves you in need of repairs, call Summit Public Adjusters at 215-752-0560 or visit SummitPublicAdjusters.com. Again, Summit Public Adjusters, you can reach them at 215-752-0560 or just visit Summit with 1T, publicadjusters.com. Licensed in PA and New Jersey.
Yeah, it's Isaiah. And Chef, let's say hello to you this fine evening.
How you doing?
All right. Dan, the
Here
great Dan Silver. How are you, man?
I'm fired up. The season's over. I don't have to spend any more evenings watching this trash hockey team. It's great. So everything's looking good for the summer.
Yeah. So welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode number 115. Brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com. We call this one the O&B Autopsy. So just some numbers. The Flyers are 3-4-1 since our last show. And while some nice things happen, like Farabee gets his 20th goal and all that, for the most part, it's been a pedestrian season. The Flyers went 25-23-8, 58 points out of the playoffs. They were last in goals against with 197, 14th in goals for, 160. They had a minus 38, minus 37 goal differential. Horrible. PK was 30th. At 73.1%. Power play was 20th at 19.2%. And relative to expectations, this was a disaster, a dismal season. And we're going to have a lot to say about it. And then we'll go through position by position, coaches, everything as comprehensive as we can get. And go from there. We'll take a little sneak peek at the NHL playoffs. But let's open up with you, Dan, with your thoughts about what went down before we start the actual autopsy.
Well, let's see. I mean, I guess I'd like to talk about the press conferences that the Flyers had yesterday, if that's, are you just opening up to me just to kind of talk about what I want to talk about?
Sure, we can start anywhere.
So, we don't need, everyone knows how bad of a season it was. It's, for me, I'm 41 years old. I've been probably following the Flyers for, let's say, 30 years. To me, this was far and away, compared to expectations, this was the worst season in Flyers history. When you look at it compared to expectations, this is not the worst Flyers team over the last 30 years, but compared to what people thought they were going to potentially be able to achieve, which was maybe be a Stanley Cup contender, certainly be a playoff team, at a minimum compete for a playoff spot, and they fell short of all of those goals. They're well out of the playoffs, with a month to go in the season, just a completely disastrous season. And then they've got this press conference yesterday where they had Dave Scott from Comcast, and then you had Vino and Fletcher. And these guys are sitting there and they're basically blaming everything on the pandemic. Talking about how, one of the most interesting things that they said was that, they noticed that, some of the guys who stuck around in the U.S. to train came into camp a lot more ready than the guys who were from Canada. It really is just a strange statement, and talking about how it's harder to find ice time and time to train up there. And I don't know if it was like a veiled shot at some of the younger Canadian players on the team, like Patrick and Konechny, who maybe came in, not prepared. But, you wanted to see a little bit more substance from the, administrative leadership of this team. And you just got those guys basically blaming everything on the pandemic. Every NHL team had to deal with the pandemic. So it was a little bit disheartening to hear that. It was funny because the New York Rangers, who most people thought were in the middle of a rebuild, basically fired everyone. They fired the president, they fired the GM, they fired the coach. And so you've got these two extremes. You've got one team that's sort of blaming their poor performance on COVID, and another team that's rebuilding is basically saying it's not good enough, we didn't make the playoffs. Probably the truth should be somewhere in between for both teams. But there certainly just wasn't enough of a sort of a sense of, urgency from what we saw yesterday. Now, the what's really going to be telling is what happens in the offseason, right? So I understand that Chuck Fletcher can't sit there and talk about who he's going to trade and what kind of moves he's going to make. So we're going to have to wait and see what he actually does. But it was a little bit of a disheartening press conference from the leadership of this team, the off-the-ice leadership of this team.
Yeah, I kind of went off yesterday. Chef and I were on the Flyers Nitty Gritty podcast, and I was thinking about the Canada thing. So I said something like, so Connor McDavid would have had 130 points in 53 games, and it was like they were speaking at cross purposes, because Chef, it's also true that Chuck Fletcher said we need help in all areas, that the Flyers have been building since 2014. So he has a sense of perspective where the fans' minds are at and what they were promised when Ron Hextall came in. And so in that respect, that was like one of the few things I heard yesterday that made me feel like he knows. He knows that this franchise isn't used to that. In fact, he said something about the goaltending, how it hasn't really been reliable for a long time here, which was kind of like rattling the cage maybe of Carter Hart. What were your other impressions?
I in one boat, I'm with Dan. I really think that you need to have accountability, and it's up and down. Now, did some of the players not come? I mean, I blew my top about it yesterday. I said, yeah, some of the players did not come prepared, and it was obvious. Some players were obviously hungrier than others. Sam showed a lot more life in his chances than Nolan Patrick did in regular games. But I understand the frustration, and I see the frustration, and I know the frustration because I am one of those people that's frustrated too. And I can see what you're saying about, it seems like, I don't know if there isn't a plan. It might look like it. They're not saying a lot of stuff, and they're actually, I don't know. I called it on when we were on Nitty Gritty, I called it a stall year, because there wasn't going to be a lot of stuff that was going to be able to get done to begin with. So, and you're hedging your bets. And then, we talked about with Yariv that how somehow that Fletcher might have been gun shy because he got burned in the last expansion draft in Minnesota. Okay, so let's put all that. Could you make a case of the conspiracy theory that we like to throw around the Flyers fans, that like nobody cares since Ed Snyder died? I don't know if that's the case. I just don't know how realistic stuff was going to get done in this particular small past off season into a COVID nightmare with a flat cap. Now, I do think, like Dan said, that first move after the expansion draft, whoever gets plucked, and if there's moves, if there's a trade during that, I think you'll see some snowball. I said on last night, I think you'll see, as my boss calls it, lots of littles. A little bit moving here, a little bit moving there, a little bit moving there, all throughout the league. I think everybody's going to be reshuffling because anticipation, I know a lot of Philly places are going to 100% in a couple weeks, and Bucks County and all that, and then locally. So hopefully, and New York is getting more open too. So I think they're looking ahead now and going, okay, come September when training camps open and the season opens, we're going to have full attendance, and we better have a half decent product. So I don't know. I'm kind of in the middle of where I stand. I knew that a lot of stuff wasn't going to be done, but I also think that stuff could have been done. At least, like you said in previous shows, make the moves to make the team better for the future. Maybe not right now, but for the future.
Yeah, and yet with some of the decisions they have to make, Dan, with the contracts for Sean Couturier, and it looks like Alain Vigneault's state of mind, because he was kind of shaky yesterday. And I tweeted out something like, he looks like this season's really taking it out of him. They really have a tough decision to make in terms of how far they want to go in shaking this thing up.
I mean, they're going to have to make decisions that are going to change where this franchise is heading, because they can't. With Giroux and Couturier both being free agents at the end of next season, it means that you're going to have to choose a direction, especially with Couturier. I could see Claude Giroux maybe taking somewhat of a hometown discount to stay here. He's been here his whole career. Sean Couturier, is a extremely important player for this franchise, and he's going to get offered a lot of money somewhere else to play, because he's a Selke Trophy winner who's, maybe a little bit past his prime, but he's still a pretty young guy in his late 20s. They're going to have to make decisions on those guys, and that's going to tell you whether or not they think that they're a cup contender, for the next number of years, or if they're sort of more of a rebuilding type. Now, they could try and make a trade with Couturier before he hits free agency. That's an option. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be this is the most pivotal offseason since I've been following this team, just because there's so many different paths that it could take, and they need a number one defenseman. Are they going to be able to get one in the current cap environment? I don't know. They're going to have to get someone to take either Voracek's salary or JVR's salary, and it's not going to be easy. JVR's salary might be a little easier for someone to take because it's, $1 million less than Voracek, and it doesn't have as much term left on it. It's got one fewer year left on it, but it's not going to be easy. And, the only good thing that came out of this season for moving forward is that Carter Hart and Travis Sanheim and Nolan Patrick played so poorly this year that you're not going to have to pay them a whole lot as restricted free agents. But you're still going to have to find a way to, open up some dollars and some cap space to go after someone. But yeah, they can't just sit around and do nothing. Like, because of Couturier and Giroux's contract situations, they're going to be forced to actually make some decisions that are really going to impact things down the road.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. So many things come to mind. I'm having some echoing here, and I apologize for that. Not really sure why. But the things that are sticking in my mind are the press conference. Each participant had kind of like a different take in a lot of ways. And like, you listen to Dave Scott and his truncated appearance, it sounds like, from the corporate perspective, if they could just get back to where they were in March of 20, they would be happy. And to what your point is saying, Dan, that that's not good enough with the juncture they're at right now with G and Coots alone, let alone the fact that you're not sure who they are. I mean, it seems like a lot of people are putting faith in that period after January 1st of last year, and that's who the Flyers really were. They were one of the best teams in the league. They won 10 in a row. But before that, in 2019, I don't like to talk about it, but I think it's important to remember that in 32 out of 82 games, they were down 2-0. This season, they were beaten by more than 4 goals, 9 times. And, from Jordan Hall put out a stat, and with I guess before the last 2 games, since the start of March, in games after a victory, the Flyers have gone 1-11-1 and have been outscored 67-29. Add that to the fact that they've been in the playoffs every other year for a decade. Some of the playoff rounds they won, they didn't really even deserve to win, including the one versus Montreal in 20. And they weren't impressive in the bubble. I'm more toward the negative side of things. And I think it speaks to the team identity and things like that. Chef, what's your comment?
Yeah, I was confused. I think a lot of people, too, were confused because, like you said, it was almost 3 different opinions, almost, of where they stood. And you were getting like a hint from Fletcher and actually from AV that, okay, we know it's got to get better, and we're going to do what we, they're throwing a corporate line. And then you have Dave Scott, and like you said, he said, "Oh, when we get back to here, everything's better." But it's like there's a disconnect right now between upper management and the fans, and it's never been greater. And Dan was talking about the time he followed the Flyers. I followed them, since 1978, 79, when my mom was a big Flyers fan, and you go back all the way to the 60s. So this is probably the biggest disconnect I've seen with what the fans, expect and think. And in Philly, and this is pretty much league wide, and all sports actually. The Philly fans are kind of known to be that, a little bit smarter and cutter. They know the teams, they know the ins and outs of everything, and they are very opinionated because they're very passionate, and they really think that more could be done, can be done. And I think that's where I guess they're frustrated because they can't see that. How are you Dave Scott and not seeing what 500,000 to 1.5 million Flyers fans see? And they're just aren't, when we're just armchair GMs and owners,
Yeah. Yeah, the passion of the fan base here, we've held our powder for a long time. It was obvious that the Flyers just weren't going to be able to continue doing things Paul Holmgren's way. And that's why we swallowed our tongues for a couple of years and watched Hextall try to rebuild on the fly, kind of like what the Bruins were able to do. And they were able to pull it off for another cup run or 2, and the Flyers obviously were not. So that's kind of like a macro view. It's like, Dan, it used to be, and it probably you identified this early on in your fanhood, if you will. The Flyers wanted to try and get to a point where they could create a window of contention to win a cup. And that's what AV said. I came here to win a cup. And I just don't see that with the current management. I think Chuck Fletcher's all over the place. AV wants to win a cup. Dave Scott just wants to go back in time before the pandemic. And if they can't get there, what is the point of what they're doing when you look at the contributions they got this year and who had a good year and who did not?
Well, I think that you have to, if you want to if you want to have any hope, you kind of have to look at it from the sense of, okay, what are the things that need to happen to get this team back to the point where they're potentially a cup contender? A lot of strange things happen in the NHL. And I still think that, Carter Hart, this was far and away the worst season that he's ever had as a professional. I mean, he dominated the Canadian juniors every single year that he played. He was, very good in the NHL up until this point. It was kind of like one of those seasons where basically everything went wrong. And I think you kind of have to, you don't have to, but I choose to take the viewpoint of, hey, what can this team do to, get back to the level where you think that they could contend for a cup? And I think there is a path to it. I think that we saw some good stuff at the end of the season from guys like Wade Allison, who I think plays the game the way that we want this team to play the game. I think that there's Joel Farabee is the same thing. Obviously, Kevin Hayes came out yesterday and he needs a minor surgery. He didn't say what it was, and he said it didn't impact his play, but I'm going to guess that it probably had a little bit of an impact on his play.
Yeah.
I think there probably is some truth to the fact that maybe some of the young guys didn't come into camp like they could have, maybe like a Travis Konechny, a Nolan Patrick, although I don't even know if he's going to be back next year. But, I think that Oscar Lindblom is a guy who, if you want to take the optimistic approach, 2 years ago, he was one of the best players on the team, if not the best player for the first month or so of the season. And I think that you can probably say that he needs a full offseason to get his strength back after the cancer. So I think he's a guy that you could really look at from an optimistic standpoint. To me, I still think there's a path where if they add, a top level defenseman and also maybe, another mid-tier right-handed D-man to play on the second pair potentially, I do see a path where this team could become really competitive again next year. So that's kind of how I'm choosing to look at it. I talked about what we heard from Dave Scott and Alain Vigneault and Chuck Fletcher yesterday. All the players did interviews too, as you kind of mentioned, and a lot of them were really pissed off. I think they get it, and I think you would like to think that they're going to come back next year, the guys who do come back, and hopefully approach things from a different manner. Maybe none of that's going to happen, and maybe this team is just basically dead in the water, and then it's going to be sort of like a death spiral. But I'm not going to look at it like that. I'm going to look and see what I think they can do to try and get back to that level that I thought they were going to be at going into this year.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you. I mean, this year they got fairly good contributions from their veteran core players like JVR, G, Jake, and Couturier, even though I thought Couturier was a little bit off this year. He was hurt in the beginning of the year, and you wonder how banged up he was. I mean, if there's also good news that JVR and Ghost became more attractive as expansion pieces. So I think those two players can't be back next year with the amount of needs they have just because of the amount of cap space that they're taking. Seattle's going to take somebody. They really do have to clear space. They need it. I think they're going to need two defensemen, one on the top pair and another one to settle things down in the manner that Braun did this year. And they really do need a shoot-first player. And as much as I like Wade Allison and expect him to be a good player, I don't want to judge too much in garbage time. It's kind of like September baseball. Don't get too carried away. I'm cautiously optimistic about him and York for that matter. But counting on young kids in the past hasn't worked for the Flyers. So I just also think, and Chef, I'll let you jump in here. I think a lot of it is the mix. When I talk about needing a shoot-first player and needing two defensemen and certainly needing a goaltender who's younger and able to handle more of the load than what we saw Elliott, for all his positive qualities, was able to handle this year.
Yeah, wow. It's a lot. There's a lot to cover right here real fast. Okay, Elliott. I know, like you said about the cap, you said you got to pluck somebody off of here, Ghost or JVR or Ghost or Jake or whatever along those lines. You remember, you got to put a little bit more if you're not going after Moose again, which is fine, I don't think he's going to be able to withstand a larger season. More games, more demands, because in this league now we found out that you need that third goalie that that can come in, because we're saying that the NHL is different now, that everybody's stronger, faster. There's more shots on net than there have ever been. So
except the Flyers, of course.
Except for the Flyers, but and the money portion of it, Moose is at 1.5. Unless you bring him back at 1.25, you're not. What's the point? I mean, unless you take a huge break, get a big deal like that, you're looking at in the range. And I think I said it last night, about $3 to $3.5 million for a backup. That's a fair assessment, I think. And looking out there, I know you had mentioned Bernier, and but. That's another $3 million. So it's clearing space, clearing cap. I don't know if we'll be able to do all that. I mean, there's going to have to be some dramatic trades or moves, and that's why I said lots of littles. It's going to be lots of little moves to make it. It's going to be jumbling on this cap space. And here's, I would love it. If you could somehow package, Jake to go off, because I think Jake is more of a Ron Francis type player. And if you throw something in as an incentive and maybe eat a couple million here and there, I think you can make it work. I'm hoping that you can make it work, but I sure as hell think he's more of a Ron Francis player than what do you call it, JVR type, but who knows? I mean, we're going to see, because I really do believe, and this is a gut thing, but I think that after the expansion draft, you're going to see a whole lot of shaking going on. That's all I'll just say there.
Yeah, and I mean, you look what Julian Brisebois was able to do in Tampa to try and get David Savard there, and work that out with a 3-team deal for cap purposes, and they're really tight. I mean, that's the type of ingenuity that Chuck Fletcher really has to have, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's not going to be easy, as we've talked about, because of the cap situation, and there's not really teams that are going to want to take on these salaries. I mean, Charlie O'Connor at The Athletic wrote a good article where he did an interview with the person who's going to be covering the Seattle Kraken.
Yeah, Ryan Clark. Yeah,
Ryan Clark, about what it might take. What it might take to get them to take a JVR off the Flyers' hands. I don't think they're going to want to take a Voracek, but to maybe take JVR, and you're definitely going to have to sweeten the pot, because everyone knows the situation the Flyers are in. They have to move salary. So they're not just going to take James Van Riemsdyk without us sweetening the pot. Now, the Flyers do have a lot of things they could use to sweeten the pot, but they're at a disadvantage. They're going to have to make some trades where people are going to be like, man, I can't believe the Flyers traded this draft pick or traded this prospect just to get someone to take James Van Riemsdyk. But that's the position that they find themselves in. And that's what Chuck Fletcher is going to try and have to figure out what to do. And I got to be honest with you, based on what he's done so far, I liked his first offseason. The second offseason was terrible, and he didn't really do much at all during the season. I thought the way that they handled the trade deadline this year was okay, and I think he knows what he has to do. But I don't think that he's some kind of mastermind who's going to be able to pull off, these fantastic trades. I have, I'm, I guess, cautiously optimistic going into the offseason, but probably on, more of the cautious side than on the optimistic side, because I need to see Chuck Fletcher fleece someone or make a move, that we all kind of like before my faith is restored in him. So, it's there's going to be no easy answers, and he's going to have to figure out how to handle it. You mentioned Ghost a little bit. It strikes me as funny. I mean, I know that everyone kind of is on the, he's the guy we want to move. It's just funny because this team was so bad this year on the defenseman level. And to me, he was just about the best defenseman on the team down the stretch. I understand that he's probably going to be out of here, but it's just kind of funny to me because he showed a lot of. I thought he played really well the last month of the season after he got healthy.
Well, he definitely had a resurgence. The problem for Ghost is he's a $4.5 million third pairing defenseman. And that is tough for the Flyers, who led the league in goals against. They were last. Now you get the puck behind him, and he's in a whole lot of troubles, and so that makes him a luxury they can't afford, and that's part of the problem. It's not a knock on him. I give him a lot of credit, especially after he got waived. That was like a wake-up call for him, and he responded the way you want a player to respond. And like I said, I think he's more attractive than he was before the season started in building value. But that's who he is. And I think JVR, the same thing. And I think you're right about Voracek. It's just that extra year at 8.25 or whatever it is. It's just too much.
Yeah, it's too much. We've talked about the young guys a little bit. I mean, I thought Cam York looked pretty damn good in his few games in the NHL. And the thing that sticks out the most to me is what I've always thought about him when watching him from the instant they drafted him and going back and watching some of his games is he almost always makes the right decision. He'll make little plays, little passes that where someone else might try and skate the puck into the zone. He's just going to make this smart little pass. And I think he's got a little bit of offensive upside. I think from a power play perspective, I think he's the Flyers' future number one power play quarterback. I mean, he just always makes the smart play. It'd be nice if he had a little bit of a better shot from the point, but in this day and age, he can almost be like a poor man's Quinn Hughes on the power play. And so I think that he could, if he makes the Flyers out of camp next year, I think he may be the number one power play guy. So I think that's a good thing. You could break York in as a third pairing NHL defenseman, top pair on the top power play unit, and he's probably not going to hurt you defensively as much as a guy like Shane Gostisbehere, just because I think he's got a higher hockey IQ. So, between him and Allison, I think Lazinski's going to break camp with the team next year. Mm-hmm. I think there are some young guys on entry-level contracts that are really going to help this team towards turning it around. But yeah, it's Chuck Fletcher that's got to make the moves that's going to turn it around truly at the top pair level.
Yeah. Before we get back into the players, I want to do a little bit of stay or go with some of these guys, but let's talk about the coaches. I mean, some of the numbers here, particularly with their special teams. I understand their structure was lousy and their 5-on-5 play drove their goaltending down, in my opinion. After the goaltending was actually pretty good in the very beginning, but last in goals against. PK was 30th. Power play was 20th. I mean, does anybody get fired? Are they really going to come back? Look, I wasn't happy with the coaching staff this year, so we want to call this an autopsy. You can't leave out the coaches. I don't think they did a great job, and I think there should be accountability on that score. Chef, what do you think?
Definitely. I think if you go right down the line, gone. I mean, you were talking about Stego, gone. Terrian, gone. What the hell does Lappy do? I thought he was when we started this, wasn't he like the replay guy up in the booth? Now he's on the bench all the time. But either way, fine, let him go. He can go too, but give him a job in the company somewhere, an organization or whatever, because the guy took 2 pucks to the face. That's great. Reward him for being that kind of guy. But yeah, I think everybody in the organization has got to go, except for I give AV another shot, but I don't think that he had, like we always talk about how on teams you can have like all the great players and it's not the right fit. And I know you were talking about that earlier. It's the same thing with coaching. I don't think this is the right fit of coaches. I don't think I would take a Tocchet on this coaching staff if he's available. When he I would like to see if he would come back. He's got that snarl that he played as a player that you can get respect from guys and show them how to. You got to start changing the concept in the concept. That's not the word I'm looking for. The culture in this locker room, because it's not good. And I think that if you went along the lines of a Tocchet-like coach as maybe a secondary coach that could step in if you're not happy with AV at the end of next year, then I'd go that route. I think that's the way I would go.
You know, in a way, people will say, hey, no way, Chuck is totally on board with, and he's not going to make a move like that. But think about it. If Chuck can't get the job done, then another GM, he's not going to be here. I mean, he really is on the clock. I don't think it's crazy to want to make a change. I don't know if I'm going to send this guy there and then, Lappy is going to apply for Gritty's job or whatever. I don't know. But, Dan, what was your opinion of how the coaching staff handled things this year? And if you were going to make changes, what would you do?
I mean, it feels like the old boys network, right? I mean, you've got Alain Vigneault, who his first year behind the Flyers bench charmed everyone, made his martini comments, and everyone loved him. He reminded me of the lead character Don in Mad Men, just kind of very smooth. Everyone loves him. I think that he's got the assistant coaches who both have coaching experience, Tarian and Mike Yeo. And this year, everything fell apart, and the power play was a mess, and the penalty kill was a mess. And I think they were kind of exposed as a coaching staff that's perhaps not all that good. And the unfortunate reality is that Chuck Fletcher at a press conference towards the end of the season, where he was point blank asked if he was going to make any coaching changes in the offseason. He could have said, we're going to wait until the offseason, kind of evaluate everything. Instead, he said no. It was pretty clear cut. No. So I don't think they're going to be making any coaching changes this offseason. Do I think that they should? Absolutely. They need to bring some genetic creativity in terms of just some guys who think about things a little differently, because whatever they're doing right now is not working. But I'm not going to honestly spend that much time thinking about it, because I don't know. The GM said that they weren't going to change the coaches. So I don't think they're going to change the coaches. It's a shame, but it seems like what's going to happen.
Well, he did say that at not yesterday, but the one prior. Now, I'm not saying that, you're wrong, because you're not, because he did say he was so mad at the players. He had, like you said, kind of like a sneer on his face, like, change the coaches. It's kind of like Jim Mora when he said playoffs. It was kind of like that. But, you mentioned, or Chef mentioned culture, and I think, to me, that is an issue that nobody's talking about. You think about this team over the last 10 years, and even now, if you just look at them now, I don't think they're a good mix of players. Because if you look at the talent, just if you go to like Puckpedia or somewhere and you look at the forward lineup and how they stack up, you say, hey, there's a lot of talent. You got Couturier between Konechny and Giroux. Hey, what's wrong with that? Hayes, you already had a bad year, but if you can throw a guy like Allison or Voracek next to him, and you have Farabee, he was a breakout player, should be a contributor for many years. Lawton, maybe not a third-line center, but a valuable player they re-signed. And Van Riemsdyk, he's good enough to be in a third line, yet he's on the first power play. And Patrick didn't have any kind of year, but, Lindblom is certainly going to move up. Kubel had an off year, but then the Flyers have Lazinski and a whole bunch of other guys that can come in and make an impact. This is a really good group, but it's not. It doesn't work. There's too many guys that differential. They don't want to shoot. There's just something missing. And a lot of it, to me, is cultural in terms of you don't look across the bench if you're the opposing team and say, damn, I got to play against that MFer. I have to play against that SOB. The Flyers don't have that. And I think it speaks to them not having the right mix of players. It's a cultural thing. They don't have an identity. I don't know what kind of team the Flyers are. You look at them in the first period in the Devils game, and they're skating circles around the Flyers. Okay, they're young. They made mistakes. The Flyers have more talent and eventually took over that game. But the Devils did kick the Flyers' ass more than a few times just recently. And then they go in against a heavier team like, it would be St. Louis or in our division, the Islanders, and they can't handle it. So I think there's some real issues there. And I think they got to bring in some vets that will help them. And one other thing, and Chef, I'll get to you. When Justin Braun, who I thought was an unsung hero this year on the team, just a voice of sanity, when he came out and said something to the effect he's never seen a team fall apart so easily. And they had this year in, year out, in the playoffs, out of the playoffs. I talked about the record. After they get a victory, it's like, I guess, it's okay. Hey, we got to win last game. And they go 1-11-1 after a victory in it's starting in March. There's a cultural problem that has to be addressed, and I think they're going to have to bring in some veterans. They have to bring in some guys that can play, like Dan mentioned in the past, like a Tyler Bertuzzi back operation, notwithstanding somebody like that. But Chef, you go ahead.
No, I was leaning towards that veteran thing. It was funny looking back now at last year postseason and seeing how much time that Pitlick and Grant and Thompson got. You sit there, it makes me question and wonder if Avia didn't see the slouch in some of the players back then. We were talking about veteran guys, and they had the players that we did not sign and got rid of, and to give Dan some credit too. I was right on board with him when he said, you got 7 young kids and we're expecting them to make a step up, and they should have. But little did we all know that they were all going to take all but one. 6 out of 7 were going to bed and take a step back. I think we really underestimated what a veteran presence, that rah-rah guy in the locker room, which I always argue about. You need a guy like that. You need several guys like that. The one that makes you get so hyped up, like I said it last night, to make you run through a brick wall, and get you all fired up for a game. Everybody needs that guy. And, does this team have that guy anymore? I don't know if they do. I don't know if they're one. Every team should have like 3 or 4 to get you going, the catalyst. Like, what was it, the saying with the Phillies? If Jimmy Rollins goes, the way that the Phillies go. That was this thing. If you look back on teams, there's always guys that seem to make other people. A great player, I always said, was not just great himself. He made other players great around him. And I don't see that kind of great player on this team. You're right. I don't see anybody I'm scared to play against.
And the other thing is, it's not always the most talented guy. Sometimes it's someone who hypes up the room, or it's somebody who makes, you said other players better. And you think back to the last time the Flyers were really a thing was in 2012. They had Jaromir Jagr and his pedigree, and they still had Chris Pronger in the beginning of the year and his Hall of Fame pedigree and the accountability that he demanded in the room. And Kimo was kind of like that himself, in a more low-key version. And I don't think that the Flyers have accounted for that. And I know Sean Couturier yesterday in interviews, Dan, was longing for the presence of Derek Grant and Nate Thompson. And, Derek Grant was dog meat in the playoffs last year, but I know what he's talking about. And Pitlick, that was a loss. So we're going to have to maybe sell some of these kids, and it might not be a popular trade to make, but to get somebody like that, if we're going to look at that deadline of, hey, what are we going to do with G? What are we going to do with Coots next year? We absolutely have to turn this thing around. And they might have to make some unpopular moves to bring some of these elements in, because they are missing.
I guess. They don't look. They need to spend a lot of money to get a top pairing defenseman, and I don't think they're going to be wanting to bring in, because they have such forward depth. I get it. They want people who, are experienced penalty killers, but you're certainly not going to want to bring in guys making $3 million to play on the fourth line or the third line and be a good penalty killer. I mean, I think you're going to have to kind of draw the line in the sand somewhere and see what they really need to go after. I mean, maybe they bring in a second pairing defenseman who can be good on the penalty kill, and they don't need to have a fourth line guy like a Derek Grant or a Nate Thompson. I mean, those guys were on this team when they were playing so poorly in the bubble. Like, I don't necessarily think that's going to be the difference, and I don't think you're going to totally turn around the makeup of the team. You're going to have to try and make a few moves that shake it up. I mean, people wanted more toughness in the lineup. They had Sam Moran in the lineup. He's probably one of the tougher guys, in terms of fighting in the league. He didn't really make much of a difference. So, it's hard finding that chemistry and that balance. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure they're going to have to make a couple trades. They're going to be viewed as losing trades by the fans. But it's, like I said, there's a lot of prospects, especially up front, to wade through. Also on defense, so it's a good problem to have, all the depth they have at the prospect level. But yeah, they're going to have to try and figure out who to trade, who to keep, and who to bring in that's going to take the chemistry to where it should be.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with a little bit, but I know we're deep at forwards, but this is where I think I differ a little bit. I know we have depth, but we have the same type of player like 10 or 12 times. That's because that's the kind of player that Hextall liked and thought would make a difference. There is no – you get past Farabee and maybe Allison seems to be different, but that was Fletch. But no, that wasn't Fletch. Sorry. I'm just looking at it going, it's the same model, same makeup. It's like, the same type. It's like Knack 2.0 is another player. I haven't seen anybody that has a different style of play or plays with a different edge than what we have right now. So that's why I agree. Well, I agree with you. It's something that other teams might want, but we're deep. We're deep in almost the same exact player, the same amount of time.
Yeah, well, give me an example. Like Tampa goes out and gets Blake Coleman and Barclay Goodrow, and they're both UFAs next year, and they're probably both going to get a raise, and that's fine. But both of those guys are tough to play against, but they're skilled guys. So if we have somebody like Lashinsky, who's not going to make a lot of money, and we got to move him for a player like that who's under contract if we don't want to play the UFA game, that might be the type of move that we're talking about. Because, and especially if they have any kind of championship pedigree, because something has to change. There's a reason why they're in and out of the playoffs, and they're not really that effective in the playoffs. And like I said earlier, even the rounds they've won, I think they definitely deserve to beat Pittsburgh in 2012, but that was 2012. So I don't know. That's how you get your ass handed to you in 19, all those times down, and you're getting slaughtered 9-0, 8-3 by the Rangers, 6-1 so many times I lost track. So that is something that you can't overlook. There has to be a pushback, even if there's a sacrifice of skilled players or players that we, have grown attached to, because clearly they're not the answer. And after this amount of time, I don't think they're going to be. But hey, let's go through this here. So if JVR, and I'll go to you, Dan. JVR, Jake, Nick Obey-Kubel, and Braun and Haig and guys like that are going to be available, and probably Goss to spare as well. What do you think it would be most ideal / realistic if the Flyers could do it with a combination of getting an expansion claim and maybe making a trade to dump more or less a salary dump?
I don't know. I mean, if they don't do anything to sweeten the pot, I could see Seattle just simply taking Nicholas Aube-Kubel as a young guy with goal scoring upside, at least as far as I see it. They're going to have to add stuff in to get these guys to take a player like that. I mean, it's sort of like unprecedented territory for me, trying to figure out, like, what is it going to take to get a team to take Voracek or JVR's salary. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know who the teams are out there that are going to want to take it on. And I don't know if you're going to have to trade a second round pick to get someone to take JVR's salary. You're going to have to trade, a Morgan Frost to get someone to take like a Voracek salary. I mean, it's a tough pill to swallow. And if you're going to do it, you better damn well have a good use for that money. You better not do it and then go out and overspend for a mid-tier defenseman to be your top pairing guy because Doug Hamilton won't come here. So they're going to have a pretty damn good game plan in place for the offseason, and I don't know what it's going to be. It's unprecedented territory as far as I can tell.
I hear you. I think they're going to have to trade for the defenseman because I was listening to Anthony Sanfilippo just recently, and he was saying that the Flyers really aren't the place to be right now like they used to be. And it's going to take a big name player taking a chance on the Flyers and liking their direction and what the team is doing to kind of change that momentum. And, kind of like the Flyers, they signed Briere and then they make the trade for Chemo and Hartnell. It's going to take that kind of boldness. I'm thinking along the lines of, would a team take a Jake or probably more likely a JVR if we offered Nolan Patrick? Because that a value. Because Nolan Patrick is like a hit or miss, but the high side on that, it's such a low risk play. Is that enough? Or would we have to throw in somebody like Robert Haig because he can play in almost any team's third pair, so they got that, and they get 2 years of JVR, and they might hit the jackpot with Nolan Patrick. Something like that, Chef.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Dan. Like, I think, if it's going to take throwing a Morgan Frost in, do you do it? But you got to make it count, and that's the most important thing. I mean, I would do it if you're telling me I get a Dougie Hamilton in return or a big tier. I think, Flair? He went out to Arizona a couple times, right?
Right.
I think that's what I saw Jamie writing about. So could there be a little side deal there? Could that be, we were talking about a salary dump and how some places have it. Could that be like a three-way trade with Seattle to get some salary dumped out of Arizona that's hurting financially, and then maybe, we piggyback in there or something along those lines? Hopefully that's it. I mean, I like to think that it's possible. And in a heartbeat, I guess maybe I'm not as nostalgic as I used to be, because being real nostalgic would be like thinking about the cup we won a couple of years ago. Oh, we didn't. So I'm not particularly tied to anybody right now on this team. Obviously I'm not gonna wave Joel Farabee. I'm not gonna wave Carter Hart out there in the wind, but it's got to really blow me away if it does, though. You know what I'm saying? I'm not afraid. I would not be afraid to make those big moves. That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
well, I mean, the names that come to mind are players like Myers or Sanheim, particularly if they have their radar set on a particular defenseman. One of those guys could be involved in a deal to get a defenseman or to facilitate a free agent opening. Because, again, they have to pay Sanheim. So maybe, like Dan was saying, maybe they saw enough of York where they could, build him up from a third pair to start the year to maybe progress. It's hard to say. York looks like he could really use still more strength. But it's definitely It's a dilemma. There's no doubt about that. But it's going to take that kind of creativity to get to that point, like Hunger did, like Brisebois did, to get the Flyers turning toward a championship contention window. They're not there yet. It's not even close. And a lot of young players are going to have to come through. And the other issue is that the Flyers have a lot of players that are older and very young, under 25. And they're in that middle group, some like 30 to like 20, 25, are not a lot of players that are helping them. It's led by players like Couturier, but, you're kind of, Kevin Hayes is more like a 2.5C after watching him for 2 years. And, Lawton they signed for 5 years. I wasn't really happy with the length of that contract. And look, he said he's part of the solution going forward. But again, he's another guy I wouldn't hesitate to move. So I don't want to go round and round on that. But I just the take home message is they have to be ready for anything to break this 10-year cycle. So. And hopefully the coach doesn't have a nervous breakdown if they don't return to form and look more like 2020, because AV did not look good this year. And when asked, is he coming back? I tweeted something out there that he looked like a guy who didn't want to be there, especially like from March on. And it seemed to be confirmed when they spoke to him yesterday. And when he says, well, I'm here to win a cup, But if they took a step back, I would not be surprised if he's like, yeah, I'm going to give it one more year. But after that, I'm one way or another, I'm going out on my shield or they're going to send me out. That's the way it seems like to me. I mean,
was that Sparta? What was that, from the Spartans or the Athens? Come home on your shield or carrying it?
Yeah, something. Yeah. So, Dan, any final thoughts? Anything you wanted to bring up with regard to the season or strategy or things that we might have overlooked?
I don't know. It's you kind of just at a loss for words when you think about this Flyers season and what's happened, and you just kind of have to put your hopes in that a reset's going to help some of these guys, and some trust in the GM, and maybe look at some of the promising young guys towards the end of the season. But it's on them. It's on Chuck Fletcher to go out there and do something to turn it around. And it's not going to be easy. So it's hard to be all that optimistic. I think that you talk about guys not wanting to come here. I think the one guy who maybe would be happy to come here and they might end up trading for is Seth Jones. His dad is a assistant coach with the 76ers, and he might be a guy that would like coming from Columbus to Philly, and he could fit on that top pair with Ivan Provorov. So, that's my off-season prediction. I think that they're not going to get Hamilton. I think that they're going to end up trading a king's ransom to get Seth Jones. And I'm not sure how good Seth Jones is because his numbers have cratered the past few years. But that's my prediction. That's what I think they're going to do. Or Matt Dumba is a guy who, the Minnesota Wild have almost 5 defensemen that they're going to want to protect in the expansion draft. Maybe Chuck Fletcher goes and gets a Matt Dumba. But I think that, I think Jones or Dumba is the guy that's going to end up here in Philly.
You think Ryan Ellis is still on the radar, or do you think there's a kind of like a resurgence in Nashville that kind of...
I don't know if Nashville's going to trade him.
To me, he'd be my favorite because he's a dog, He's not the biggest guy, but he reminds me of Chemo in a lot of ways. Not stylistically, but just like you go through that Nashville system, they know how to coach defensemen.
Yeah, I don't know if I see it more being a Jones or a Dumba, but...
No, that's a good projection. It would be an upgrade from what we have, and I think they're also going to look at another defenseman. And some of the other people that I've mentioned and thrown out there, I mean, they could settle for David Savard, who to me would be a rock-solid second-pair defenseman, or they could look at a free agent like Adam Larson, who it's not a lot of offense, but he can handle decent minutes. I know we questioned whether he could handle the biggest minutes. So, but he could be another option if, in a period of desperation. It wouldn't be a bad move. I think he's better than Savard. So I'd rather if you have the pecking order of Seth Jones, Ryan Ellis, and Matt Dumba by trade, and then you're down to UFAs. Then I think Hamilton's the top of the heap. He's going to be able to write his own ticket more or less. And then you have lesser lights like David Savard, and above him I would put Adam Larson. So that's a defenseman. And they need a shoot first winger. They need more gritty players, and they need a much better backup because Carter Hart, might only play 40, 45 games next year if he struggles. We don't know. So it's like being plopped into the middle of a big field in the plains, and there's nothing around you. I think there's a phobia. I forget what that's called. When fear of wide open spaces, it's like the opposite of claustrophobia. That's what it feels like right now with the Flyers.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Just a reminder, everybody, the O&B Puckcast and FlyersNittyGritty.com is brought to you also by Jim Steaks. Jim's South Street, 400 South Street, 4 decades of the finest cheesesteaks, hoagies, and fries in the grandest Philadelphia tradition. With or without, it doesn't matter. And if you live down near 400 South Street, but you can't make it over, no problem. They use DoorDash, and they'll get that delicious food right to your door. So just remember, Jim South Street, right at 400 South Street in Philadelphia, PA. And gents, before we roll, why don't we take a peek at the playoff matchups? The actual, nothing is totally decided. So how do you want to do this? Because some of the matchups could change. I know in the North, they're set. Toronto is playing Montreal, and Edmonton is going to be playing Winnipeg. I think that's rock solid. Yeah, definitely rock solid. So why don't we take a shot at predicting those? And these are going to be 7 gamers, right?
Yes, I do believe so, yes.
Yeah. So it's just Toronto, Montreal. Who wins how many games?
Ooh, Toronto, 6 games.
Okay. Dan?
Yeah. I mean, look, guys, I'm going to be honest. I haven't followed these teams enough to make predictions that I'm confident in. So I'm just gonna say that. I don't like giving out predictions when I'm not confident.
It's all right. I'm kind of winging it myself. I mean, Toronto, I've watched them a couple times. Edmonton, Winnipeg, that is a crazy series because Winnipeg's kind of fallen on hard times after being really impressive. They clearly have the much better goaltender. Edmonton's on a roll, and Mike Smith must be taking some super Geritol and PEDs or something. But if Mike Smith doesn't crater, I could see Edmonton beating Winnipeg. But I think it's going to take 7 games because Hellebuck is a much better goalie. Chef?
I think I get to see a lot of the West Coast ones because I'm a night owl. So I've seen a decent amount of the Edmonton games and the Winnipeg games. So yeah, I'm going to say I think it's going to be a fun series. I do believe you're close. It's either 6 or 7 games, but I do think Edmonton wins out in the end.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like as great as Connor McDavid has been. There's just too many holes and not enough depth in that team to go very far. But to see them win a playoff round would be kind of good for the NHL. Some of these other matchups haven't been determined yet. I think it's pretty clear that Carolina is going to win the division, and I think that's pretty much clinched. They're going to play Nashville, and Florida and Tampa are going to be playing, so that should be a good series. So I'll just leave it at there. We'll recap that, and we might be back before everything kicks into high gear, and we can give Stanley Cup picks when we have a chance to catch our breath. So I don't want to catch anybody off guard here.
Speaking of Stanley Cup picks,
yes,
we did our preview show at the beginning of the season with Kevin Durso. Remember?
Yes.
And I went back and I looked, and I looked at some of the stuff of what we picked, and I have to say, we were kind of wrong, a little bit wrong. I mean,
Who was?
Yeah. Well, I was. I know Dan was a little bit wrong too. Tampa Bay. Kevin had predicted Tampa Bay and the Avs in the cup, and the Avs winning it. That there was a shot at that, so he's still in it. I have Tampa Bay and Vegas in 7. That's what I said. I also had the Flyers finishing in 3rd, so I was like, okay. But I have to. I want to give props to Dan here because in that episode he said, and to his credit, I don't bet a lot and all this stuff, and he gave me the lead to go out there and for Rookie of the Year, and it'll help me recoup my Flyers bet. That I had the Flyers winning the cup, and I lost all that money, obviously. And I want to thank Dan for that pick. Dan, you want to take a bow for that one?
Kaprizov for Rookie of the Year.
Yep. Yeah, and I broke even because of Dan. So thank you.
To me, that was the, I'm a betting man, and to me, that was far and away the best bet at the beginning of the season was betting him. I mean, I said at the time that Alexis Lafreniere was the favorite for the Calder Trophy, which is one of the most insane things I've ever seen because he is an 18-year-old kid for his first year in the NHL, and those guys rarely excel. And Kaprizov is a 23-year-old kid who led the Russian league in goal scoring last year, and it was a no-brainer getting 4.5 to 1 on him to win the Calder Trophy. And Jason Robertson's made it close, but I think that Kaprizov's pretty much got it locked up. So I'm glad I could win you some money. And anyone who follows me on Twitter, I certainly gave that one out pretty hard before the season started. So hopefully won my followers some money. Yeah,
absolutely. That was a good call. So, well, with that, folks, we're going to wrap it right there. And just before we all kind of check out, I just wanted to say to all the listeners at O&B Puckcast and FlyersNittyGritty.com, people who go to the site, just want to thank you so much for this season. It hasn't been the best season for sure, but your continued listenership has grown the show, and we appreciate when you rate and subscribe and, write a review on your favorite platform. It really is appreciated, but more to the point, it's been 4 years for us, and it will be 5th year as we start the off season, and we got a lot more coming ahead. So thank you so much for your listenership. And with that, Dan, where can people find you on social media and other good stuff?
So before I give that, I just want to say, thanks guys for having me on and adding me to the team this season. It's been a pleasure working with you two gentlemen, and looking forward to hopefully more exciting and more positive things to talk about for next season. So thank you for that. Folks can find me on Twitter at dsilver88. Throw me a follow there. I'll be probably giving some horse racing picks out for the Preakness and the Belmont coming up, and giving some thoughts on the Flyers off season.
Yeah, fantastic. And Dan, right back at you. It's been a pleasure having you this year. You've been such a valuable, member of the crew. So here's to better things for next year. Jeff?
Yeah. Dan, how did you do on the Derby? I know you had I meant to go back and ask you, and I just forgot until you just mentioned that. I mean, you had a couple picks. I know you're a horse racing guy.
I had a pretty good Kentucky Derby day, actually. Hoping to keep the momentum going for the Preakness. So
Good. That's awesome.
Cool.
And thank you again for joining the team, man. You've been a pleasure to work with all season. So thank you.
Best.
All right, and you can catch me at ChefToTheLeftB on Twitter, and hit me up, and I'll interact with you. I'm always willing to make new friends out there and get good conversation going.
Yeah, terrific. And of course, the O&B Puckcast can be followed on our Facebook page, and of course on Twitter at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. And I'm Isaiah. You can follow me at ISAIAH_520. Isaiah, don't forget the _520. And with that, we'll be back periodically. I'm going to do some special project shows. Look out for those. So check those out. We'll announce those on Twitter. And when the news breaks, we'll be there and we'll analyze it and have more guests to prepare you for free agency, the expansion draft, and of course, the NHL entry draft. So until next time, everybody, take care.